Thank you. Before we get going, I appreciate everybody coming today. I'm supposed to remind you a couple things just before we get started. First, they've asked me to tell you to please turn off your phones. If you've got things that, like if you have a ringtone in 2025, you should stop doing that generally, but also in this session, please turn it off. Also, there's a couple of different surveys. At the end of this, there's GDC survey, which we really appreciate. We appreciate your feedback. We're also going to ask you for a more specific survey about Meta, about Horizon platform, about Quest, and about your business in particular. I'll show a sort of QR code at the end of that. I would really like your support in sort of helping us collect information about your businesses so that we can do better. So please fill out your surveys. Tell us what you thought of this talk. This is called Past, Present, and Future of Developing VR and MR with Meta. My name is Chris Pruett. I've been at Meta for about almost 11 years, a little over a decade. My hair used to be darker. And I run the Oculus Publishing group, which is a group that is dedicated to building games for Meta Quest and other parts of Meta's platform. My background is game development. I'm in about my 25th year or something like that. Have been an engineer, ran a game studio, and now my job is as director of games at Meta. The publishing program is just the part that I run. It's not the only games function at Meta, but it's the part that has been traditionally interested in building an ecosystem, building a platform that is financially viable to developers, as well as produces things that are good for our customers. We launched over 100 titles last year. The publishing program is going really strong. We'll talk about it a little in this talk. But this is actually not a talk specifically about video games. We're going to talk a lot about video games, but it's not really a talk about video games, nor is it a talk about so much like Meta strategy. It's actually a talk about how our ecosystem is evolving, where it's kind of come from, and where we think it's going. And I'll tell you, like, the spoiler alert on this talk is it's actually about audiences. Before I get going, I do want to just cover a couple of basic terms. I mentioned the word ecosystem a minute ago. That's like a super loaded Silicon Valley term that can mean whatever you want it to mean. When I say it, I'm talking about this virtuous cycle between developers and customers. Devs make cool stuff, customers buy it, developers get paid. That's the ecosystem we're trying to build. We're trying to make sure that there's an economic reason and not just an awesome technology reason for you to invest in something like VR. And that's basically that your end customer has a lot to buy and that your end customer wants to buy things. We strongly believe that the thing that drives an ecosystem like ours is quality. So a publishing program's long-term goal has been to amplify the quality of the content of our platform. Meta Quest is the name of the VR devices. I think you probably know this, but just in case, our current line of VR devices are called Meta Quest. We have a Quest 3 and Quest 3S, which are currently in market. And then everything else we make is basically called Horizon. So, I think a lot of folks, when they think of the words Horizon, they think about our metaverse, 3D, game engine, social thing. That's Horizon Worlds. That's a particular product within this sort of larger Horizon umbrella. When we say Horizon, we're actually talking about this idea of embodied spatial computing, which is another kind of Silicon Valley concept, but it's actually a really cool one. It's the idea that there's a human-computer interface in the future that is fundamentally based on spatial integration of people and computers, being in a virtual space, manipulating virtual space, doing the things we do today on screens in virtual space. And that's what embodied spatial computing means. And our name for all of our investments sort of in that realm is Horizon. So the Meta Horizon Worlds is the 3D metaverse game engine thing. We also have the Meta Horizon Store. The app on your phone is the Meta Horizon app. The operating system is Meta Horizon OS. When we say Horizon, we're actually talking about these whole things. In the future, when you see us say Meta Horizon X, Y, Z, you should take it to mean the whole collection of stuff we're working on, and not just the metaverse thing. Before I talk about trends, I want to talk a little bit about how the ecosystem's been doing, just from a numbers perspective. We crossed $2 billion spent on the platform recently, which is a pretty big milestone. Overall, spending is up about 12% in 2024 over the previous year. And engagement is actually up more than that. It's up about 30%. So when we say engagement, that's a measurement of like the frequency of usage of our devices and the amount of time the customers use our devices. So this means that people are using our devices more frequently and they're using them for longer. And those are actually, great numbers. We shipped a lot of cool software in 2024. Metro Awakening, Behemoth, Batman, our own project, and my personal favorite, Trombone Champ. You should definitely play this. We also shipped Quest 3S, which is our most recent device. It is a affordable VR headset, costs $299. In terms of spec, it can go toe-to-toe with our existing high-end Quest 3 device, but it is a lot cheaper, and it's designed to, collect an audience of people that's broader than our current audience based on a lower price point. It had a great holiday season. And thanks to its growth, there's actually more people actively online in VR today than there has ever been in our history, which is a pretty cool thing. Now that actually represents a lot of growth. Growth in time spent, growth in the total number of devices in the world, growth in revenue, and we have some developers who are experiencing a lot of success as a result of that growth. Here's the folks from Animal Company talking about their recent, quite dramatic success on our platform. We also have seen folks like Thrill of the Fight 2, Ghost of Tabor, FitXR, all had a great 2024. And we made some pretty big changes to our platform, right? Like we opened the store, we had a curated store, and we opened it so that anybody can ship to it. And because we did that, we found software that we might not have otherwise known about, and that software has grown very significantly as well. That includes titles like Yeeps, VRFS, and of course, the early mover in this space, Gorilla Tag, has grown to now I think it is one of the most successful VR apps or games of any kind in the world, of all time. But although there are these sort of success stories and examples of success, there's also a number of developers who have told us that their revenues have declined, who've said that they are worried about their reach, and have worried that the changes that we're making to our platform have impacted their businesses. And it's true that the types of content that we're seeing be successful today is not the type of content that we saw that was successful, in the past. In particular, even though our revenue is up overall, there's been a pretty significant mix shift in what our customers are buying. And I would say, if I'm going to try to use the language of the kids these days, like the meme games are doing great. The single-player narrative, like tearjerkers aren't. The are down, and the sort of social multiplayer competitive titles are doing very well. And that's a pretty significant shift, even over a couple of years ago. So I think it's really reasonable to ask, and we asked ourselves, okay, well, why? What changed? Is this something that we caused? Is this a result of our modifications to our platform? What's going on? And I think it would be a large oversight I'm going backwards. Oh my gosh. There we go. Large oversight for me to not address, the sort of general game industry context. Last couple of years, spending is down, investment's pretty flat. It seems like live service titles and indie darlings are the only titles that are doing quite well. I actually think it's very difficult for a single player narrative tearjerker game to be successful on any platform right now. But of course, this context impacts folks who are developing for VR too. I can't ignore the greater context of the game industry, which some of the trends we're seeing, are mirrored on other platforms. But I want to today spend time talking about the things that are specific to our platform and are things that we can control or that we at least can measure based on the data that we have access to and the sort of the trend line that we've seen on our platform. And it's true that things are changing. And I talk to a lot of developers. Developers have a lot of theories. Everybody's got a theory. Some people think that the boogeyman is that we opened our store. We opened our store, the signal to noise ratio changed. Now these titles that used to get promotion in the store don't get promotion in the store anymore, and that's why their revenue has declined. There's some folks who look at our mobile app, and what they notice in our mobile app is the front page of our mobile app is now mostly Horizon Worlds content. And I have some developers came to me and said, like, you traded the shelf space for Horizon Worlds, and now my revenue has declined, and that's got to be what happened. I also heard that like Meta doesn't care. Like there's a couple of developers who say like, boy, you guys just want free-to-play titles. Like you don't want this stuff anymore. You're not putting any energy into single-player games or the types of games that were successful in the past. You just want free-to-play games. And we have internally, we have our own theories. We have our own like what's happening. It's actually quite difficult to prove or disprove any given theory because we can't just rely on precedent from other platforms to inform how our platform's going to work. Like nobody's ever built a VR platform the size of ours. Nobody's ever attempted to do what we're trying to do, and it's not necessarily the case that like the business trends that work on other platforms apply the same way that they apply to VR. And I think this is, when you say it, it's sort of self-evident. Like in the early days of mobile, I think we all sort of thought that mobile games were going to sort of work the way that games worked on other platforms. And what we learned over time is actually they have their own thing. They work a completely different way. They have their own monetization approach. They have their own user interaction approach. They're targeting a different cohort of people. And they're very successful within that thing, but they aren't particularly the same as the console or PC games that came before them. So we're very careful about sort of not just assuming, because we see something happening on a platform over here, that the result's going to be the same over there. And we need to answer these questions by doing like actual research, by doing like data analysis and doing sort of looking at our users, looking at our content, looking at how the content has changed over time in order to determine what's actually happening. So we did that research. We spent months and months on it. We were surprised by the result. And I'm going to tell you what that result is. But before that, I have to sort of back up a little bit and kind of bring you along on like a little bit of the way that we think about our history as a platform to get to the point where like what our research says will make more sense. Oops. Okay, so early days. When I joined, the device that we had in market was called the DK2, which is Development Kit 2. It was the first real 6 Degrees of Freedom VR headset, I think. And it was pretty janky, but it was also quite magical. Like it was the first time that most people had ever put on a functional VR headset, and it was functional, it worked. And there was an audience for this stuff, for these like early dev kits, and that audience was people who were super excited about the VR technology. They've been dreaming about virtual reality for their whole lives. They wanted to get in there and experiment, and like the software that we saw coming out of that community, we didn't even have a store at this point. It was like people trading, application binaries on the internet. The titles that we saw were like basically tech demos. They're like, hey, how do I move forward? Like, what happens if I jump? Don't jump in VR. It's basic stuff. Like, what is the basic interaction grammar? How do we do rendering? How do we do like this sort of fundamental boilerplate problems that needed to get solved? And they weren't products really. They're just like experiments. So when we shipped Oculus Rift, which was our first real consumer product, that audience came along. They were like, yes, cool, a higher end consumer grade VR headset, I want that. But the folks who came in for Rift weren't necessarily these like hardcore tech enthusiasts. They weren't necessarily the people who were like, oh boy, how does VR work? Like, what's my motion to photon latency? Like, that wasn't them. They were like, I want to play VR games. I want to play the games I'm playing on my PC. And I, by definition, am a pretty hardcore gamer because I have a high-end gaming rig in my house. I want to play those games and I want to be inside them. Like, that's what I want. So that audience was much more of a core gamer. And we saw, a pretty significant shift from the sort of the DK2 audience to the Rift audience. And it's kind of an obvious thing to say it out loud, but it took us a while to realize that, the folks that are buying the Rift are not even necessarily a superset of the DK2 folks. It's like a different group of folks. They have a different group of needs. So we also built this device called Oculus Go. And our goal, with every device release is to say, okay, we've gotten some sort of audience, right? We've sold this device, people have bought it, they're enjoying it, they're using it. How can we expand that audience? So the idea with Go is to say, could we make a super duper low cost, accessible device? This was $199. And it was pretty good, honestly. The problem with it was only 3 degrees of freedom. So it could do rotation, but not positional tracking. It also didn't have proper controllers. It had a positional controller. And the software that we were able to ship for this device just was not high enough quality. Even though it sold pretty well in its sort of early days, the folks who bought it didn't retain. And what we learned was that 3 degrees of freedom wasn't sufficient. even for a broader audience of like non-gamer people that we targeted, they needed to have a higher bar of a higher minimum technical bar, and this device did not hit it. There was by the way, like a ton of internal debate about the sort of Rift side of the house and like the Go and Gear VR side of the house. I gave a talk in 2022, which is on YouTube, which you could watch, which is kind of about our internal thinking about that, and like, is it fidelity or is it scale? And if you're interested in that topic, you should go watch it. For now, I'm just going to move on and talk about Quest. Like, when Quest launched, it was the result of all of the learnings we'd gotten from both Rift and Oculus Go. And the purpose was to sort of try to combine the best parts of each and try to capture a specifically core gaming audience. And the folks who showed up here were actually, again, distinct from the core gamers that we had on Rift. Those folks were all about high-end fidelity. They spent a lot of money on their graphics card, and they want every single pixel to be rendered by 15 shaders, and they want every visual effect to be applied 15 times so they can validate the exorbitant cost of their graphics card. Like, there's a visual fidelity equals value mindset for some of those folks, and that was not the same as the people who bought Quest. In fact, if you go from PC VR to Quest, like, the graphic fidelity is not the same. But turns out there's a whole lot more people who wanted a standalone headset that had no wires and required no graphics card at all. You just put the thing on your head. So that was an audience of gamers, and particularly with Quest 1, they're still pretty core gamers. But they weren't the folks who were fixated on like high-end fidelity and graphics, which the PC VR folks certainly were. Like, our big breakout hit on Quest was Beat Saber, which is a very fun game, but not one that hangs its hat on visual fidelity. And then it was particularly true with Quest 2. Quest 2, that audience, Quest 2 came out during COVID, and it benefited quite dramatically, I think, from the lockdown. And a bunch of different people went out and bought it. And that moved our audience really from a core audience pretty well into, like, I would say, a mid-core type of group, where you now have people who, yeah, they want to play video games, but they're not the super hardcore 150 hours in Dark Souls people. And they're also including a bunch of people who are doing things other than video games. Like, we were able to push sports and fitness in particular with Quest 2. And by the way, that brought in a lot of people who never would have bought a VR device. Like, we saw an influx of women, for example, who are interested specifically in fitness. So our goal with every one of these devices is to expand the audience. And for each of these releases, I think we were actually quite successful. Quest 2 also, by the way, importantly, where we started to see teenagers as a class show up on our platform. We started to see them really early in games like Gorilla Tag. But an important point that I'm trying to make here is, at each of these phases, the audience expanded, but their previous audience, sometimes they came with it, but they changed. Like, the new audience that grew was actually not the same as the audience that existed before. We also made Chris Pruett didn't sell. Then we made Quest 3. It's pretty good. Very much a continuation of sort of the Quest 2. It's the same sort of similar audience. Games, fitness, movies. This is the type of thing these people want to do with it. And we saw teenagers growing significantly. And at this point, we had actually identified a group of people that are sort of our Quest 2, Quest 3 audience. And we call them like the VR elite. And these are basically tech-savvy adults who have some disposable income. They like playing video games. They bought a Quest 2 or Quest 3 in order to put this headset on and play some cool games. And they have been sort of the engine that has driven our ecosystem for many years. Teenagers, much smaller cohort, but very intense and intensely focused on a couple of titles like Gorilla Tag. Also an important part of this Quest 3 audience. So then we shipped Quest 3S. That's October of last year, very recently. And like I said, it's designed to sell. It was low cost. Again, goal is audience expansion, right? How can we get more people into VR? We don't just want to replace the existing, like, if everybody just upgrades their devices and it's the same people every time, then we're not winning. It has to be larger and larger audiences every time. So how do we get new people to buy the device? Well, Quest 3S is like, what if we lower the price, $299? And our intent was to expand the audience beyond this VR elite crowd, to say, like, who else can we grab that's new? And it's actually done very, very well, but it's the pattern of its sort of sales and behavior are actually quite distinct from our earlier devices in a way that was surprising to us. And it's worth sort of digging in a little bit about how Quest 3S has sold. Usually, when we see sales of our devices, they follow like a pretty regular graph. This is not a real graph. This is what I drew freehand. But the idea is, we do pre-orders. We do pre-orders. We say, new device is coming. There's a bunch of sales that happen at the pre-order time. And then we launch the device, and a bunch of people go buy it. And then Black Friday and Cyber Monday roll around. We sell a bunch more devices there. And then Christmas shows up, and the devices that had been purchased as gifts, they all turn on, and we see this big spike. That's the pattern. It's been pretty stable for the last several devices we've shipped. Quest 3S didn't actually do that. Launch went really well. Launch went great, but we had very, very few pre-orders. Pre-orders were weirdly silent. And then Black Friday, Cyber Monday came and went. It was pretty good, but what we saw was the devices that were being sold, and we were selling plenty of devices, weren't being turned on. And we were trying to figure out what's happening with this giant set of devices that has been sold but has not yet been activated. And our assumption was, maybe they've just been wrapped up and they're being put under Christmas trees and given out at Hanukkah. They're holiday gifts, right? And sure enough, Christmas rolled around. We saw this gigantic activation spike, like 6x what we saw on Black Friday. Huge spike. The relative weights of these spikes, still not a real graph that I'm trying to communicate here, is very different for Quest 3S and previous devices. And that was an indication that the audience had started to shift because the buying patterns had shifted. So then we started watching these people who come in, particularly with the holidays, and say okay, well, what are they doing? And it turns out they behave differently too. They like free-to-play online multiplayer games. They do paid apps also, but the types of paid apps they buy are different than the types of paid apps our traditional VR Elite cohort has purchased. They really like I Am Cat, for example. They don't really spend a lot of money on core games at all, as far as we can tell. They're not interested in a traditional shooter or something. They are quite mid-core and maybe a little bit price sensitive, and biasing towards content that they can get into for free. And importantly, the area of this where we thought this was a huge success is that almost all of these people are new to VR. This is their first VR headset ever. The vast majority of them have never owned a Quest in their lifetime. So we managed to sell this device to a new audience of people who haven't previously owned our headsets. And it's not too difficult, based on the description of their behavior, to figure out that these are basically teenagers, right? They are into social multiplayer games with humor. They don't have a ton of disposable income. They tend to discover the titles that they want to play off-platform. They're going through socials or influencers. They are playing games that have sort of a moment in the sun or a little bit of trend behind them, and then they kind of move on to the next one. These are folks that play Lethal Company. They're playing Fortnite. They're playing Raft and Content Warning and Melatonin. And by the way, you should play Repo. It's really fun. They're in that too. On other platforms, that's a type of game that they're playing. And on our platform, when they come to our platform, they're looking for something similar. And it's not like these are a new audience, right? These people didn't just magically arrive with Quest 3S. We've had them in the platform really since Quest 2, but they are growing very quickly, and their usage is growing very quickly. In particular, they are now the most active cohort, as far as we can tell, of customers on our platform. And that represents a pretty massive shift in our customer base. It hasn't happened overnight. It's actually been happening slowly, year over year. But we've kind of reached a point, particularly with Quest 3S, where the sort of tide seems to have turned. And now this is your most active VR user. So when we did the research about what's the impact of these changes, the changes to the store, changes to the Meta Horizon app, doing things like merging App Lab into our store. When we did all the research for that work, the basic result that we found is that those things had a contribution. I'll talk about them in a minute, but they weren't the significantly main contributor to the ecosystem changes that we've seen. by far, the much larger contributor is a mix shift in our audience. We found basically that new users are spending less than they used to, but older users are also spending less than they used to. And that might not actually be specific to our platform. I suspect that there's a similar trend on many game platforms today. But more importantly, the most significant contributor to change the ecosystem was the sort of shift in our audience, and in particular, the rise of teenagers. And that's especially true on Quest 3. Quest 3S. Now, I know I've spoken with many devs who sort of assumed that the impact to their business was sort of directly related to these like moment in time changes we made, like opening the store. And in fact, I've talked to some developers who witnessed very significant declines in their revenue. And this particularly tends to be folks that were building for that VR elite crowd and had been successful for quite a while are now finding that their sales are not nearly as good as they used to be. And so I think there was an assumption that like I said earlier, everybody's got a theory. You open the store, you changed the front page of your app. That must be why. And it's easy for me to come up here and say like, don't worry, it's just teenagers. Meta lives and dies on data validation, right? Like we require every theory to get proven with data. So we don't make, and I talked earlier, like we can't rely on precedent. As a company, we refuse to rely on precedent. Like we actually need to go out and test every single assumption and hypothesis that we have. So we did a pretty significant data analysis of the store changes specifically. And the way we did them is we used something called a holdout group, which is basically an A/B test. You have one group of people, the majority of people who get all the new stuff. We open the store, they get to see all the new layout, they get all the new stuff. But then you have another statistically significantly large group that never sees any of those changes. To them, our platform looks exactly as it did at the beginning of 2024. And by comparing the behavior of these two groups, we can kind of do an apples-to-apples comparison of like what the impact is. Right? If you see group A behaving differently than group B, then you can say, okay, well, the differences in the platform are responsible for that change. But if they're the same, then you can pretty safely say, well, okay, those changes actually didn't affect behavior. And because we did this work, we have a pretty good idea of what the actual material impact to the revenue on our platform has been from all the changes we made last year. Here's a slide. I mean, basically what we found is opening the store caused a 1% loss of top-line revenue. Changing our Horizon app to feature Horizon content caused about a 3% loss in top-line revenue. And all of that was made up for by other things, and we ended the year 12% up. Now, I'm talking about top-line. Individual applications may have experienced more variance, particularly if they were the folks targeting VR Elite and they'd been doing quite well before. But basically, what I'm here to tell you is like these changes were not material impacts to the revenue generation capability of our platform. It did not hit the top line. And it's important to note, I've been talking a lot about this growing cohort of teen people, but the VR Elites are still there. They're still in the platform. They're just growing a lot more slowly. They're growing more slowly, and they exhibit a couple of particular patterns, which are making them increasingly difficult to reach. One is they spend most of their money in their first month. They get our device, they put it on their head, they find some cool stuff they want to buy, they buy it, and they play it. And then after that first month is over, they don't actually come back and browse very much. When they come back to buy something, it's because they learned about it somewhere else. They learned about it off platform. They saw it on their social platform, or some friend told them about it, or they saw some advertising, whatever. They have something specifically that they intend to buy that they're coming back to our platform to actually purchase. And so it's a little bit unsurprising, I guess, if you know that, to say like, oh, store changes didn't have a huge effect. Yeah, because they don't actually leverage the store to buy their things very often anyway. In the first month, sure. As new users, sure. But after that, they depend quite a bit on community, marketing, social networking. I think it's also, one of the memes I heard was like, opening the store must have caused a giant spike in free-to-play. Like Meta only cares about free-to-play, and that's what they did this so that they could drive paid applications out of the business. Well, okay, paid apps are still the majority of our revenue by a pretty healthy margin on the platform. Like most of the money that's generated on the platform comes from paid applications. It's true that free-to-play applications have been growing pretty consistently as a share of total revenue, but that trend's been happening for years. Like they're continuing to like sort of make inroads on total revenue year over year, and we saw that same growth this year, but there's no spike. Like for example, when we opened the store. In fact, if you look at the graph, you can't tell the moment in time when the store opened. We did not observe, at least, any particular inflection that the store changes made on the sort of ratio of paid to free revenue. By far, like, I guess I should back up. I think the bottom line really is that we made a bunch of changes, and we worried about them a little bit. Developers worried about them a little bit, but we actually did the research to figure out like what is causing these changes. Is it something that we caused? Is it general industry trends? And it's true that the changes we made did have an impact, but it's very small. And the much larger contribution to overall ecosystem change has been this rise of new cohort of customers, in particular teenagers. Now, my intention today is not to tell you all to run out and make meme games for 14-year-olds. Because our goal is to grow the audience, and guess what? The research says that the rising group of teenagers is not the only new audience that we are starting to capture, we're starting to see. They're certainly the most active at the moment, but we can see in the data that there is a rising group of a completely different cohort of users. And they're kind of on their way to the platform. They haven't really completely arrived yet. We can see them, and we anticipate that they're coming. And that group is what we think of as sort of these mainstream adults. These are, kind of dads, like 30-something men in the United States who really like to watch TV. They watch sports, they watch movies, they watch television. They play video games too. They play video games as well, but video games are like a secondary kind of pastime for them. They don't identify as gamers at all, even though they actually spend quite a lot of time playing games. And they're pretty distinct from our earlier VR Elite cohort, which is also adults. Because if they were into VR because of the idea of VR or because of the specific content we have today, they would have bought a device already. These are folks that are interested in high fidelity media consumption. And as the resolution of our devices increases, it is increasingly viable for them to use our headsets as a replacement for their television. And like this group's small today, but it's growing pretty quickly. And we think by like 2027 or so, they're going to be a major player in the ecosystem. And mainly, I tell you this because, this is a prediction that we have. I tell you this because I think the idea that the audiences grow and change as we expand the user base is fundamentally always going to be true. Like, we are not going to be successful as a VR platform if we constrain ourselves to a single audience. But at this very moment, what we're doing is we're moving for the first time, really, from being one single mode audience target to having multiple audiences that we're targeting at the same time. Right now, it's VR Elite and teens, but soon it'll be VR Elite teens and also these mainstream adult folks. And I think that is just like the way that it works when we grow a platform from scratch. So our audience is changing, right? What are we as Meta doing about it? Well, as I said, like all of these audiences are important to us. If we just took one and replaced it with another, then we will not have net growth. Like, the goal is to grow the total number of people and the diversity of people in our headset. For that to be true, we also need the content to remain viable, even though it's diverse, right? So like, I can't have a race to the bottom where only free-to-play games work. That'd be terrible. I need, all kinds of things. I need single-player, 40-hour narrative things to work on our platform also. And I suspect that when the like mainstream adult 30-something dads show up, they're not going to play the meme games, right? I don't think they're the audience for that. So we actually need all this stuff to be viable. We need free-to-play, we need paid applications, subscriptions. All these things need to work. And we need to be able to target and effectively address all of this different audiences. So to do this,
We're learning this pretty quickly as we go too, right? This is all work in progress stuff. But to do this, we're making a lot of changes to the platform itself. We've already made a bunch of these changes, but there's a lot more coming. We've improved store merchandising and ranking. Just as an aside also, like we talk about things like ranking or store as if they're these like static monolithic things, but the truth is there's systems that are changing all the time. Like we've changed the ranking algorithm in material ways a whole bunch in the last like 4 or 5 months since our store opened. So even as I tell you like, okay, well the opening of the store had this impact, we're already in the process of fine tuning and changing the work that we do. We've also rolled out a bunch of services for developers, like you have control over your pricing, you have controls over your sales. Those are previously things you sort of had to work with us to schedule. Now it's sort of all in your hands. In particular, we're putting a lot of emphasis on personalization in the presentation and merchandising of content. Like if we have multiple audiences that are live at the same time inside our platform, then we need to make sure that we're presenting them with content that is accurate to their taste. We haven't done that very well in the past because we had a really well-defined singular audience. Now we have to do it better. We've spent also time on user controls for defining what they want, better filtering, better search, better taxonomy of our software so that customers can sort of drill down into the large collection of apps we have and figure out what they want. Product pages are also improving. Things like wish lists are becoming increasingly important because as you start to realize that your customer is going to find your content basically not through our store so much as through your community outreach or through your advertising, it becomes super duper important that you have tools like wish lists where you can sort of collect a customer before you launch and then retain them and then notify them through launch. And UGC is super important to a class of applications as well. We've modified the product pages so that you can actually link out to UGC content or to social content and merchandise it there. I think the main message that I wanted to communicate here, in addition to like the specific numbers, is that we're a huge change in 2024. Changes we made to the platform, changes that happened in the external economy, changes to the game industry itself, and it's actually quite difficult to untangle what's happened. We spent huge effort to do the research to produce the sort of numbers that I'm sharing with you today. It's really easy. It's really easy for us as well to sort of conflate correlation with causation. And I think the changes we made, particularly to our store, were like extremely visible. Like we made big announcements. We had all kinds of things. We were opening the store. It's a whole thing. But when we actually went and looked at the data, those aren't the biggest movers. And also, like the reason that we're data-driven, like the reason we do this work, we have holdout groups and we do this research is that when we screw up, which happens all the time, when we screw up, we need to know that that's happened so we can make modifications. And so our model is to have a hypothesis, ship it, learn from the data, and continue to make changes. And we're right in the middle of continuing to fine-tune the work that we have. I have a little bit left of time in this talk, and I want to kind of change gears to talk about a couple of other things that are important to us and hopefully important to you. The first is Horizon Worlds. I've gotten through 40 minutes of this talk without talking about Horizon Worlds. It's really important to us, though. I actually spent a ton of time making our social multiplayer online game engine really good. We recently released an external editor to a much larger collection of developers that had access to it before. And our big push this year is to bring our Horizon World content to mobile. Now, I talked a little bit about audience expansion. When it comes to Horizon Worlds, our goal is to make sure that it grows much more quickly than it's currently growing. Like it's growing, it's actually had a great year, but it needs to grow a lot faster. And the way that we intend to do that is by significantly increasing the size of the potential audience for Horizon World content by bringing it to mobile. You can try this right now. You can open up the Meta Horizon app, find some Horizon Worlds, and play it right on your phone. I would consider the current stuff we have as pretty early and mostly a test, but we're shipping and learning from it really quickly. And in the next year, we're going to dramatically improve the sort of content and delivery quality of the Horizon Worlds on phones. I think it's easy to imagine that going to a phone audience is a way to significantly expand the number of people that are out there. But today, most of the people who are using Horizon on their device are headset owners. Like they bought a Quest and they installed the app, and that's why they have the app installed. In the future, we don't really think that's true. We think they'll probably be a minority. But we do think that it will be pretty effective to sort of upsell Quest devices based on shared Horizon work. So for example, if you imagine a couple of friends getting together to play a video game in Horizon Worlds, and one of them has a Quest and the other two don't, the other two can still play. They'll jump in and they'll play from their phones. But probably the dude that's in the headset's going to have the best time. And so we think that we can upsell the sort of VR as a way to play video games, particularly socially, via the use of mobile devices. And I should add also that, like, just as a concept, UGC is super duper important to almost any growing platform. In the last year, we've seen the quality of the content that the creators in Horizon are building just really improve. And there's actually still quite a bit of work to do there. But as we see the sort of quality of the work improve, we also see that sort of amount of time being spent in Horizon Worlds, the sort of customer sentiment, all those things also go up. And that's part of the reason that we announced a $50 million creator fund last month. This is a very large fund, and it is designed to incent developers who aren't currently building in Horizon Worlds to come give it a shot. In particular, we think the folks that are going to be super interesting for this segment are folks who have mobile game dev experience, like folks who know how to make a sticky mobile game. Come try to make it in our engine. It'll be neat. And it, honestly, even if it doesn't have a VR counterpart, we're still interested in how you can build. We need your feedback, but also we're interested to see like what you can build in our engine. We have a ton more to talk about related to Horizon Worlds later this year. If this is something you're interested in, particularly if you're interested in the fund, there's all kinds of info in the booth. If you just walk down to the expo, you can like sign up and learn all about it, and like we will tell you, we'll talk your ear off about it. But this is a huge major focus for us. And I think it's very common, partially because we've named everything Horizon, for folks to assume that our device and our metaverse thing are intertwined, but really both of these efforts are critical to the long-term success of what we think of as embodied spatialized computing. I also want to talk a little bit about the Oculus Ignition program. Oculus Ignition program we announced last year. And I just wanted to give an update. I don't know if, for those of you who were here last year, you probably remember the purpose of the Ignition program was to try to help new startups that had come out of the game industry layoffs, particularly from 2022 and 2023, right? Like we had tens of thousands of people in the game industry lose their jobs through layoffs. And when that happens, we expect that a bunch of them get together and form new startups. And so we said, well, what if we had a fund that would allow us to help bootstrap those startups? So we had this multi-million-dollar Ignition fund. The idea was if you're a young, new company who's just started up and you're thinking about making something, if you try your hand at building something for our platform and you have a really cool pitch, then we would fund a development of a prototype. I announced it last year here at GDC. We had a huge number, like hundreds of applications, way more than we honestly anticipated. And they were amazing. And from those, we picked 21 companies. These are the 21 companies that are receiving funds through the Ignition program from us. If you are an investor who is looking to get invested in MR content creation at an early stage, you should check these guys out, because we thought they're awesome and we funded them. And you can look at their slides, but they're all new companies. So you don't know who they are. Let me show you some of their content.
3, 2, 1.
Ignition sequence start.
I think it's pretty impressive work, considering that a bunch of these companies didn't exist this time last year, or had only existed for maybe a month or two. We're very excited about this program. These are the early prototypes that you're seeing today. I think for many of them, this is the first time they've been seen publicly. I'm real excited about this particular group of devs and what they build. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about Oculus Publishing. I mentioned this briefly at the beginning of the talk, but one of the, on the theme of theories that I've heard, one of the theories I've heard is Oculus isn't investing in content anymore. The Oculus money dried up. Well, we shipped 100 titles last year. We've got 200 titles in active development right now. And the publishing program, I'm happy to tell you, is going strong. But the type of content that we're looking for this year is very different than the content we've funded in the past. In particular, we're interested in these mainstream adults that we think are going to arrive in something like 2 years. We're anticipating that projects that start up today or start up early this year will ship right about the time that this audience really becomes a force in the ecosystem. So that is the focus of the publishing program. If you're interested in publishing, I'm very happy to talk to you about it. You can come find me after this talk. There are a bunch of people from my team here today who can talk about it as well. We are increasingly picky about what we work on, but the idea that we are no longer funding content is not true. We, in fact, have an unbelievable slate, the largest slate we've ever had in our past, and a lot of it will ship this year. Well, finally, I want to make sure I leave a little bit of time to answer your questions. But before I go, I'm going to make a request, which is that we do all this data research. We do all of this information that we have data scientists on staff, and they do all this work, and they're able to produce these numbers that I've been able to show you today. It's a huge amount of effort at our company. We are an extremely data validation-driven company. But there's some kind of information that we just don't have access to or don't know about. And in particular, the information that we are missing is about your business. It's about sort of how much it costs to build your software, or how much your burn rate is, or what your expectation on a VR platform for ROI is. And so we put together a survey. It's actually part of a sort of larger GDC survey about how we did. It's not, it's like 5 questions or something. And our hope is that you can help us write our roadmaps. That you can help us understand the types of developers. We have lots of information about the cohorts of users on our platform. We have relatively small amounts of information about who you all are. And so we'd like to learn more about the sort of nuts and bolts operations of your business. So my request is, if you have time, to please scan this QR code, take the survey, and let us know kind of how your business operates, which would be extremely helpful for us. And with that, I will wrap it up. I will take questions for about 10 minutes. What always happens to me is that there's a lot of folks who want to come and ask questions, but they don't want to get up to the microphone. So we can kind of do this 2 ways. Either I'll just randomly pick people in the audience, and you can, or nobody likes that. Or what we can do is I'll end a little bit early. I'll give 10 minutes or so for questions. And then if folks have follow-up questions, I will get out of the way of the room so the next presenter can come up and get ready, and I'll meet you all out in the hall to continue talking. Thank you very much. Sir.
How you doing? Hey, my name is Lex. Great talk. I look
Thank you.
forward to this every year, and you don't fail to deliver. Tell us, you're talking about the expanding ecosystem. You mentioned a little bit the Horizon Worlds. Are you the proponent of the apps versus the Horizon Worlds? Are you kind of the advocate for that? And then tell us a little bit about, in terms of the lighter meta glasses, Ray-Ban kind of thing. Is there anything you could share about that in terms of the future, and then how could we position ourselves better?
Sure. So the question is, what do I think about apps compared as versus, I guess, Horizon World content for our customers, as well as what's going on with Meta Ray-Bans and glasses? Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I think the way that we think about it is the engine that the content is built with is kind of the user shouldn't care. Like I think most customers don't know if their software that they're running is built in Unity or Unreal. I don't think it's material. What they care about is the quality of the experience. We have a particular type of social experience that's like interconnected that we're trying to drive with Horizon, and it's something that no other game engine does particularly well. And we've built Horizon Worlds in particular to do UGC-focused, social, like high-density social games that can like do things like immediately port to phone without any additional work. Because we want to increase the volume of that content. But from a user's perspective, I don't think they should really care. Like I think these things live side by side in our ecosystem, and the way that they operate, the customers that they target, and the way they monetize, for example, is largely up to the content creator or the developer and what they build, rather than the engine that they select. I mean, that's I think how I would think about it.
But in terms of monetization, it's really, as you attract developers, it's really to the app ecosystem. Is there monetization in the Horizon Worlds, and what is kind of the plan on that?
Yeah, well, monetization in Horizon Worlds works today. It's basically in-app purchase stuff. I would say it's extremely early. And part of the reason for us to put together a large creator fund is we understand like it's hard to get material, like it's hard to get professional developers involved in a platform that's so early that it's kind of hard to quantify the monetization opportunity. Mm-hmm. So that's very frankly the reason for us to produce a fund. That type of like how Horizon Worlds should monetize, exactly how it should work. I think that's something we learn from developers. Like you should show us how most effective way to get users to like come to the platform and spend money on it for your content. And we're willing to sort of, put some incentives on the table to take the risk away there. But I don't think we know, all the answers there yet.
Oh, fantastic. Looking forward to it. Thank you for sharing the insights and the data. It's invaluable. Thank you.
I will say, just quickly for your last question about our Meta Ray-Bans. Meta Ray-Bans are wearable glasses. They have a camera, they've got AI. They're super cool. They're selling really well. We also showed Orion, which is our early AR prototype. I think you could think of VR and AR as independent investments for us that we would expect to eventually converge. But right now, I mean, we're very happy with what's going on the AR side of the house.
Hi. Now that you've done this research, are you thinking about alternative ways of getting games on the radar of people who go on these shopping sprees and then leave because you mentioned they need to be reactivated? Are you thinking about that from Meta's perspective of how to do things differently if they're not browsing as much? Or do you have advice for the developers who are seeing that dip about sort of the alternate ways of reaching these audiences?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I think if I repeat your question, it's like, is the sort of solution for trying to reach customers off platform, outside of our things, is that something that Meta needs to solve, or are there ways that developers should solve it? How we think about it? Is that
Yes.
reasonable? Okay. We certainly think about this a lot. Our experience is that the stuff that we do from an advertising perspective, for example, is significantly less effective than the stuff that developers do themselves. And the reason is that developers know how to market their games better. And they know where their communities are, and they understand what is interesting about their software in a way that is much more natural and nuanced than what we understand. So if you look at the top titles today, they all have a very robust community that they are managing. I mean, Gorilla Tag spent years building its community before it even decided to ship in our store. They've got, when they release an update every month, they can go to their community and say hey guys, go check out the new update. And that's a superpower that we don't have. So we're, of course, always thinking about ways we can reach the customers that are on the platform. But I think probably fundamentally, our effectiveness is going to basically be a measure of once people decide to come back to the platform, what do they do? So part of that might be just increasing the amount of time people spend in the headset. Part of the reason to reduce the price of the headset, for example, is to drive the total active user time. If they're in the headset more often, they're probably going to see our feed, or they're going to see the store, or they're going to go browsing. We can try to get folks in the headset for longer periods of time. But in terms of specific device, or specific title marketing, my feeling is the developer has much more, a much stronger lever there than we do. And it might not look like traditional marketing. It might not be, buying ads or the sort of mobile style user acquisition. It might be cultivating a community on Reddit or something like that. But we have seen, I guess the last piece, which, is just an anecdote really. We've seen a couple of developers in the last year experience big spikes in success because a video went viral on TikTok or on Instagram or and we think that there's probably a under leveraging of existing, particularly video-based platforms for VR advertising, because you can reach an audience much larger than the audience of people who own a device today, as long as the viral videos you have works. And so we know that there's leverage there. We have not been the folks building the viral videos, though. It's been influencers and developers themselves.
Right. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I'm curious, have you found that the VR Elite, when they come back to buy the big VR Elite style games, are they only coming back to buy games that are exclusive to the Meta Store, or are they, yeah?
I don't know that we have specific research on exclusivity. I don't think we track very closely like where developers ship their other titles. I think it's, I mean, if I were going to guess, my guess is that they come back to whichever platform they happen to own. But you know, I don't have actually any specific data on that.
Thank
the
you.
finding was specifically that we could see the pattern of somebody discovering something, coming to the platform, making a purchase, playing it, rather than, you know, idly waltzing into our store and browsing the shelves.
Thank you so much.
So Gorilla Tag is a game that makes me both want to cringe and emulate. Two things about that. One, you mentioned as a growing population, which if we've all read the Meta blog that came out recently, we already knew the younger population is really starting to grow. One, you mentioned that they don't have any discretionary income, and yet Gorilla Tag grossed over 100 million, probably even way more at this point, because that's a little bit of an older stat. So where's the money coming from? I'm assuming mom and dad, but I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. And number two, when you look at all the reviews for Gorilla Tag, even the 5-star reviews, oh, it's great, this and that, the mechanics, blah, blah, but the environment is very toxic. And I don't know if any of you have been in Gorilla Tag, but I have with my 10-year-old great niece and 7-year-old great nephew, and it's abhorrent. But the kids love it and whatever. So I guess just, how do we balance like wanting to make a game for the VR community that we love and many of us have been in for so long, and this toxicity that comes in with all these kind of younger players?
Sure. To your first question, which I think was if teens don't have a lot of disposable income, where's Gorilla Tag's revenue coming from? I honestly don't have the answer. My assumption, I think, and I can't comment or give like any kind of rigorous statistical analysis on data that we haven't actually studied. But I would say my guess is that the teen audience, it's not that they have no money, but they're just more price sensitive than a 20 or 30 something adult who has a job. So they tend, and also I think that they move through content pretty quickly, like they sample things or something gets popular and they go through it and then maybe they move on to something else. And so they bias, I think, towards content that is free to play, and then they end up converting through an in-app purchase somewhere down the line. And if you look at the way that Gorilla Tag monetizes and some of the other titles that it's actually like a very straightforward, currency and hats type of monetization process. So I don't honestly, I don't have data to tell you exactly how that works, but our assessment is that these are not the people who show up and say, the first thing I'm going to buy is a $40, 50-hour single-player narrative game, right? On toxicity, I think that all online platforms, particularly online games that are targeted at youth, suffer from this problem, right? It's certainly not specific to VR, certainly not specific to Gorilla Tag. And the best solutions I've seen so far are developers that are deploying automated services to catch the most toxic people. So we did a study about a year and a half ago with a developer who had an online multiplayer game that they were worried about toxicity. And we worked with them to integrate some third-party software. And that software, what it does is it sort of runs on the headset. It monitors the microphone. It never sends any of the data outside of the headset, but it monitors the microphone and it listens for keywords. Like if you say a particular racial slur too many times in a row, then it will fire off to the developer a warning about this particular developer, and it'll attach the evidence.
Like a tox mod.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And what that developer found was once they collected that evidence from sort of this automated user report system, and they went and they banned the small subset of absolutely toxic people, the like level of toxicity average across the thing just dropped really significantly. Like their whole title became significantly more wholesome and significantly more palatable for a larger audience. I don't know that that will work generally, but we had good luck with that particular developer. I do think this problem is existential and not specific to VR.
Thank you very much.
I know that it's 3, so I'll try to be fast. I'm doing research right now with omnidirectional treadmills, and I was basically wondering, like, do you think if Meta were to start adding on those technological additions, if that would also help to increase the like usability and retainability, especially with people who experience like cyber sickness?
I think that things like treadmills are super interesting, particularly from a research perspective, because you can actually measure how people feel about like locomotion with them. They don't seem, to me anyway, like viable customer products. Like if you look from like Rift to Quest, for example, removing the dependency of having a PC in your home was a huge win for us. Like going more and more standalone. Like you don't need to have anything extra. Right now, everything you need comes in the box. I think the only thing you need is a phone to set up the Wi-Fi, right? I think anytime you sort of add a separate dependency, even if it is something that might increase the quality of the experience quite significantly, you suddenly cut some huge percentage of the audience that is just not willing to buy a peripheral or not willing to set something up in their home that is not movable. So I think rather than like, I don't really know about omnidirectional treadmills, for example, but my general idea would be that like, in fact, we need to move the other direction, having it as self-contained and simple and low friction device as possible.
Thank you.
Last one, and then we will. Right. If you have further questions, I'm happy to meet you out on the hall.
It's my honor to have the last question. You mentioned about 3 categories: VR Elite, Young and Teen, and also the mainstream adult. It's just a little bit confused. It sounds like there's some overlap between VR Elite and also the mainstream adult. So what is the particular difference, or the focus area for the mainstream adult? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think. So I should start by saying these adult audience that we think are growing, this is our conjecture based on the data. So as the data improves, maybe we'll change our minds. But the way that we currently are looking at it is these are people who did not buy our headset to play video games. They bought our headset specifically because they want a really high-end TV in their home. And maybe our headset is actually a cheaper and higher resolution way for them to get a virtual screen in their home than actually buying a TV. Once they have our headset, I actually think they're going to play a lot of video games. Just like when they go out and buy a TV, they plug their PlayStation in and they play it. But the purchase intent and their fundamental thesis about how this device works is not based on this is a game console. It's based on actually this is the best screen in my home. And oh, by the way, I can do all these other things with it. So I expect that we'll see significant behavioral differences between those folks and the VR Elite, because the VR Elite folks are people who are like, damn, I can get inside a video game. That sounds awesome, right? Sure, that is awesome. Those people will continue to buy, but we're actually looking at a much, much larger audience of potential purchasers that come into the device with the expectation of getting a really high-res screen and then stick around to do other things.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.